Hello and welcome everybody to our Regenerative Transition webinar series. This is webinar 3, Dirt to Soil, Transitioning to Biological Farming. So before we actually get started and let everybody join, some of you might be professionals at our webinars by now, so you know the question I'm going to ask is, if you can in the chat, please go ahead and put where you're coming from. And Jay, you're the first one in there from Colorado. Way to go. And just to familiarize yourself, there's a chat window at the very bottom of your screen if you want to just go ahead and open that up and then tell us where you're coming from. Wow, we already started off massively international this time. I think we've already hit most of the continents. Way to go. All right, well, we have a really exciting webinar to cover today, so let's go ahead and get started. So today, again, is webinar 3, Dirt to Soil, Transitioning to Biological Farming, and we're going to spend about 5 minutes doing introductions of our panelists. And then we'll get into keys to a successful biological regenerative agronomy program. And that's going to be Todd, Adam, and Brad are going to do that, and that's about 45 minutes. Then we'll have a quick video and discussion around the Kickstart Your Soil package. And then we'll end with a Q&A, which we roughly plan for about 35 minutes of Q&A. And again, this are going to be questions coming from you, attendees, to our panelists. Our total time today we're predicting is about 1.5 hours. All right, let's talk a little bit about some housekeeping items here. So the attendees will be in muted mode for the duration of the webinar. That just makes sure that we have really good audio quality. And then we also have 2 buttons that you're going to interact with. One you've already interacted, which is the chat window. And that's great for you to be able to converse amongst all the fellow attendees, and the panelists might chime in there as well. But if you do have questions that you want to have covered in the Q&A and you want the panelists to be able to cover, please go ahead and click the Q&A button. Again, that's going to be at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And if you open that up, go ahead and type your question. And just realize, if you put your question in chat, it will likely be missed and not be applied or available for the panelists to be able to answer during the Q&A section. So if you do have a question for Q&A, make sure you use the Q&A button. Other than that, please enjoy today's webinar. All right, and let's talk a little bit about this Regenerative Transition webinar series. So we did have webinar 1, which was Regenerative Vision, Soil Life, and Global Communities. And then we had webinar 2, which was Compost Collaboration, Soil Food Web Professionals. Both of those replays are available at webinar.soilfoodweb.com and also YouTube at Soil Food Web School. So if you missed any one of those 2 previous webinars, they were fantastic webinars, really. Definitely go out there and give them a replay. And today's webinar will also be available for replay if you want to go back in case you miss something, or you really want to just go back through the information that we covered. All right, let's hear from our panelists. So Dr. Elaine Ingham. Elaine, take it away.
I just have to find that mute.
Exactly.
So yeah, I am the founder of the school. Along with everybody else now, they actually do most of the work, but I am a soil microbiologist. It was really odd when I was coming up through the ranks in academia that I was so interested in dirt or soil, and had to batter around those 2 definitions coming through, that soil has life in it. You have to have the food web, the soil food web present for it to be soil. Otherwise, if you don't have any organisms in it, how can any of the processes in that soil or in that dirt, how can you have anything going on in order to grow the plant? The plant relies on these organisms. Now, we need to get an understanding of how we can control, how we can give or take the bits and pieces out of your ecosystem and select for the plants we want and not for the plants we don't want. So today we should give you some pretty good ideas.
I agree. Thanks, Elaine. Todd.
There's the mute button.
See, I'm not the only one.
Nope. So anyways, Todd Harrington. I own and operate a company called Harrington's Organic Land Care in Connecticut. I got involved in regenerative farming. I don't even think the terminology was used back then. when I met Elaine back in the 90s. But I was into the organic thing in the early 90s, but I didn't really understand why some organic products worked and some didn't until I met Elaine. And then obviously everything changed for the good, of course. And I've been on that path ever since with regenerative farming and learning about the soil food web and utilizing everything I've learned from Elaine and from my work locally and also consulting. That's why I'm excited to be here today to work with Brad and Adam, who I started working with, I think, I don't know, it was 2000 and I think it was 2014 or 15, somewhere along there. I've learned a lot working with these guys, and they're just amazing farmers, agronomists, and I take it away from there, I guess.
Great. Thanks, Todd. All right, Brad.
Well, thanks for allowing us to join you on this little journey here today. But Adam and I got started in regenerative farming. It's strange, but it was essentially based on a bet. At the time, my background in agronomy and farming was completely conventionally based. We had an acquaintance, I guess is probably the best way to put it, who had come to us and asked us repeatedly to try some biological products. At the time, again, very conventionally based, very conventionally minded, kept saying no, kept saying no. He finally said, look, just give it a shot. If it doesn't work, we'll never come back. So Adam and I both looked at it at the time as, this is an easy way to get rid of this guy. Well, to make a long story short, the trials we did the following year, which that would have been back in either 2011 or 2012, every one of them paid, and they paid well. So we continued on the road with this individual and kind of the base of his products, but we hit some roadblocks. And we hit some significant roadblocks due to lack of education, lack of understanding from him and his team. And I don't say that derogatory, but it was basically presented as, okay, this bug's in the jug. This is all you need. This is going to take you as far as you need and want to go. And again, we were hitting roadblocks. And so we reached out to Dr. Elaine Ingham, and she put us in touch with Todd Harrington. And here we are nearly 10 years later. We're still learning. We all are. I think everybody in this group would agree that we're learning every day. We're learning every year. We have to, because things do change. And even you look back and I don't know, Elaine, if you remember that point in time when we spoke prior to you putting us in contact with Todd, but I would venture to say that even yourself would agree that, there's some things that maybe were believed at that point in time that we now have learned that maybe not that they were untrue at that point in time, but we've just learned so much. And I know there's others involved in soil biology and regenerative farming that, 10 years ago would have said, well, we know about, this much of the soil biology subject. And today, some of those same people say, well, it may be this much. And that's one of the huge challenges. And that's one of the things that Adam and I are striving to do along with Todd and everybody involved here. So thanks again for having us.
Thanks, Brad. All right, Adam.
Yeah, well said, Brad. So yeah, it's pretty much he pretty much said exactly what I would say as well. And I farm with my brother, uncle, and a few cousins, and we cross several acres. We do corn, soybeans, and wheat. So we are learning stuff every year. We're trialing different things. We're constantly looking at cow mag ratios. We're also we make a lot of vermicompost extracts. We're doing a lot of biology and trying to improve our soils using a lot of cover crops, but learning every year. Every year I feel like we make progress, but we're learning something new. So yeah, it's been a journey. It's been a great journey. We still have a long ways to go, and we have a lot to learn, but we're willing to do that and willing to take that on.
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, I hear Brad and Adam, your point is it feels like we're just at the tip of the iceberg. There's still so much to understand and learn, and there's so much new science coming out. So it's a fun ride for sure.
But still, you get benefits, and when what you're doing, they're getting higher yields, more nutrients, and less work, hopefully. So, it's a trade-off. We've got a lot ahead of us here on this road, but it's better than the other road that's taken us
For
to total
sure.
damage. Mhm.
That's for sure. Okay, and then I'm Brian Vag. I'll be your host today. I'm a soil food web consultant, and I have 2 consulting companies, Sprouting Soil and Soil Matters, and I'm based out of here in Oregon. Okay, we want to jump right into the presentation here, and I think, Brad, you're taking us away, right?
You're the boss,
All right, you're taking us away, Brad.
at least today. So the folks at Soil Food Web have asked us to discuss today the keys to a successful biological regenerative transition program. When we started down this road, of course, we had a ton of questions then. We still have questions today, and that's perfectly fine. Again, there's things we learn every single year, and that's one of the biggest downfalls of the farming and agriculture community, and maybe not just agriculture. It literally everything to do with growing plants, trees, etc. There's folks that are very highly respected, and this is not a derogatory, disrespectful comment, but there's a lot of folks that believe they have it all figured out. One of the things we'll discuss later on in the presentation, when it comes to diseases, when it comes to insects, when it comes to weeds, when it comes to the sheer issues with dysfunctionalities of soils, we have to realize that we as farmers, we as an industry, we generally have created our own problems. One of the reasons Adam and I started AgriBiosystems was because of the lack of education, lack of understanding. We started trialing things based on NPK fertility of, okay, so let's go put out 250 pounds of nitrogen and 250 pounds of phosphorus and 250 pounds, just going down the line. When we started trialing these things, as we started challenging status quo, we started to learn some things that is not highly recognized by the industry today, that just because we go put all this fertilizer on these fields does not make a plant available. And that's one of the biggest fallacies and one of the biggest problems that we deal with is we think we have to go apply all of this excess fertilizer. And in a lot of cases, that's leading and creating some of our issues that goes back to diseases, weeds, insects, etc. And in the chemical warfare of, you see a pest, you kill it, whether again, that's a disease, an insect, weed, etc. But in all of the years, 50, 60 plus years since pesticides were introduced into agriculture and farming, how many pests have we eliminated from the face of the earth? 0. The issues when we see a problem arise in a field of one of those things, it's not a lack of pesticides. And we have to realize that anytime something occurs, whether good or bad, there's one or more reasons why. And those are some of the things that we're going to discuss as we go on through the presentation here over the next 45 minutes prior to the Q&A. So we often get asked, what's the number one key to making this transition? And, years ago when we first started down this road, we would say, well, we need to see some soil tests. We need to take a closer look or an examination of particular fields, of which we still do. But the number one key is your mindset. There will be trials and tribulations, and there will be things that will pop up in your mind and think, I don't know if this is the road for me. And so as you're looking or thinking about going down the regenerative or biological path, we have to be steadfast. We have to be steadfast that we want to produce higher nutrient density foods. We want to have soils that are functional, because functional soils bring us so much stress mitigation and resilience that not many people in farming across the world today can even fathom and realize. But we have to be willing to unlearn those old thoughts and habits. And just because we've done something a certain way for 20, 30, 40, 50 plus years, it doesn't always make it right. There's things going on, not just in the United States today, but across the world, cancers, other autoimmune diseases, obesity, etc., These things just aren't happening because as humans, we've become lazier. There's a lot of things going on across the world today that unfortunately we as farmers are contributing to those problems. I don't know, how in depth we'll get into some of those today, but just because some agency has deemed, say, a pesticide as 100% safe, that's not necessarily the facts. And what we need to do far more often, and this is one of the biggest wake up calls that Adam and I received when we did our first trials with biological products back 12, 13, 14 years ago. We have to be able to take a step back and utilize common sense. Dr. Albrecht has another famous quote, and it's along the lines of study books and study nature. And when they don't agree, throw the books out. And that is 110% true. And those are the things that we constantly challenge ourselves in some of the things that we're doing today and trying to continue to improve. But just because it's in a book doesn't necessarily mean it is absolutely gospel. And that quote is one of the most profound and learning quotes I've ever heard in my life, because there's things we need to take a step back, and we need to utilize common sense approaches to what we're doing. So again, the number one key to this, it's our mindset. And we have to be steadfast that, okay, this is the road I'm going to go down. We're going to choose and work with people who have been there, who have done that. That's why we reached out to Dr. Elaine. That's why we reached out to Todd, or actually that's why Elaine put us in contact with Todd. But that's why our relationship has lasted this long and will continue to go further and further and further down the road. One of the other tremendous keys and another very profound quote, and it's how do you see things? And Don Campbell, he said, if you want to make small changes, change how you do things. If you want to make major changes, change how you see things. And so this can really go along with every aspect of our lives. But in terms of plant growth, soil biology, growing higher nutrient dense foods, et cetera, when we see a disease, what's that tell us? Does that tell us that we have a deficiency of a fungicide or some other pesticide? Does that disease tell us we have nutritional imbalances and deficiencies that are actually creating this? And this is one of the things was discussed prior to starting the slideshow, is anytime something occurs, again, either good or bad, there's always one or more reasons why. Plant diseases, insects, weeds, dysfunctional anaerobic soils, there's always reasons why. And this is where taking that common sense approach to, this just doesn't make sense. Again, study books, study nature, and they don't agree, throw the books out. But when you see, so we went through a very stressful growing season this year. Very, very dry from planting season, which started generally in early April. Without two significant rainfalls, one the last weekend in June and about a 4 or 5 day stretch in early August, there's a lot of situations, especially in conventional environments, that crops would have absolutely fell apart. But here again, if you want to make major changes, you got to change how you see things. And we also heard a lot this growing season, especially early on. Well, our root systems have to be phenomenal because it's been so dry. Those roots were forced to grow deeper aggressively after that water. That is also something that is simply not true. Roots have to have moisture to grow deeper. And wherever that opinion was started from, started a very, very bad chain reaction of making opinions and making justifications based on an opinion. Because what you will see in excessively dry soils, you'll actually see root systems cap off and stop growing because they have to have that moisture. And so again, let's utilize some common sense. Let's see our own shadows in our fields. And when we see something, especially that occurs time and time again, once again, insects, diseases, weeds. We continually fight these things, especially in conventional environments, and they're getting worse. So let's utilize critical thinking and let's bring to the table some actual solutions so we can overcome these things and not continue to spend dollar after dollar after dollar every single year on the same things. So the concept of seeing, we talk about this a lot in our own meetings, field days, etc. I'm not going to go real in depth on this particular slide because I've already pretty much gone into it very in depth at this point in time. But when we do see these things, and it also, it is a human health situation. Again, the cancers, the autoimmune diseases, all of those things, there's true root causes there that can be fixed. One of the biggest ones, and it is the dysfunctionality of soils. You know, there are 6 main aspects that a functional soil provides to our plants, to the food that we're growing, to the ecosystem, to all of these things. But conventional farming for years, we go plant it in the spring, we spray it, we work it in the fall, work it again in the spring. But when we have issues with water infiltration, or you even go through a stressful year like we did here in central Illinois and across a lot of the Corn Belt, or you go back to a 2012, which was a major drought across the entire Corn Belt and fringe areas. Yet in those situations, how often did you see a native prairie or an old growth forest, or maybe it was a field that had been taken out of production and put into a government type program where all of the pesticides and those things, high salt fertilizers, had not been applied? Did you see the same kind of stress in those environments that we did in our crop fields? And in most cases, it doesn't exist, or at least not to near of severe of a negative degree. Again, the dysfunctionality of soils is one of the biggest plagues and one of the biggest things that we fight. And if you follow Advancing Eco-Agriculture at all, John Kemp did a tremendous webinar earlier this growing season about drought stress, resilience, and stress mitigation. Years and years ago, especially when I was growing up as a young man, growing up on the family farm, you know, if it didn't rain for 2 or 3 weeks, even in some of this poor sandy soil along the Illinois River Valley here in Illinois, there was concern, but not the concern that we have had to gone through here in the last several years. And that's because those soils have continually been degraded over time, and we're losing that functionality. We're losing that resilience. And that's one of the biggest reasons, again, after we saw the positive results to the biological trials we did 10, 12 years ago, of why we're working with Todd and Soil Food Web Group today. A lot of our diseases, a lot of our weeds are also caused by deficiencies and dysfunctionality of both calcium and phosphorus. It's not just those two, but in terms of weeds and diseases that grow in our fields or show up in our fields, those are the 2 of the big ones. And how many times in looking at a soil test, how many times is our calcium level sufficient? How many times is our phosphorus level sufficient? How often do we constantly, in, again, conventional methods and management, how much phosphorus and calcium is applied to soils annually? Phosphorus likely more than calcium. But again, these are things that we need to address, because there is facts, there is solid science behind every bit of this. If we're willing to challenge that status quo, and if we're willing to look and do the right research with the right people, that's how we can find those root causes and then bring solutions to the table for our farms, your farms, and everybody down the road. Excess plant nitrates is another one, especially from a disease and insect perspective. Excess nitrates are also a major negative aspect or issue with the suppression of so many other nutrients. And so if we look at an agronomy book today, whether it would be Illinois, Iowa State, Purdue, Tri-State, you name it, it will recognize 17 or 18 essential minerals for plant growth, depending on which one of those books that you might research. The thing is, the amount of essential minerals and nutrients that plants need is in the 70s or 80s, but some of those are needed in such small, minute amounts that science doesn't recognize them as being essential. Because some of them also, they're not needed for the structural growth. They're not needed to produce roots and leaves and all the parts of that structure. But some of them are needed for immunity. Some of them are cofactors. Some of them are there to help drive enzymatic processes. That is one of the most important parts of all living organisms in the world today. And the excess nitrate issue, in terms of that nutrient suppression of phosphorus, of sulfur, of potassium, calcium, boron, and down the line, one of the biggest issues that we fight, and it is those excess nitrates. It's that beacon, it's that signal that tells non-beneficial insects, hey, I'm sick. Come on, come feed here, get everything that you need with no detriment to your own life. Plants do also have the innate ability, with the proper nutrition, the proper balance, to produce millions and millions of different compounds to protect themselves in any given second of any given day. So how do we achieve the consistency, the excellence, the performance that we dream of, that again in a lot of cases maybe we don't think is possible? Number one, we have to manage for economical results. There are still cases today, there's still cases today. We'll sit down with a new customer or prospect and ask, well, how much is in your budget for fertilizer? How much is in your budget for this? How much is in your budget for that? And unfortunately, there's a lot of cases today where we have growers and farmers who are not operating under budgets. We also run into situations where we have farmers and growers who are spending and blowing their entire budget on things that aren't on the top, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the list to build a functional system or a moderately functional system that can give us that balance of nutrients in the plant and in that soil. So we have to manage for economic results. There are so many things still done today, again, simply because we've done it for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. Well, I think I need 200 pounds of this and 200 pounds of that. Well, what testing are we doing that actually backs that up? Because any solid researcher, say in the case of applied nitrogen, especially in conventional environment, if you want to show you can greatly reduce nitrogen applications and money spent on nitrogen, if you know the environment, if you know the field, if you know the details of what to look for to show that, okay, Mr. Farmer, you're typically putting on 250 pounds of nitrogen, I'm going to prove to you in this field that you can do it on half that. If you have that calcium to magnesium balance, if you have some native soil biology working for you very effectively, if you're doing some different things with micronutrients to produce the enzymes and some of the cofactors and some of the synergies needed to do this, it can be done very effectively. By the same token, if you're a researcher and you want to show, well, the folks at AgriBiosystems, the folks with Todd Harrington's group, the folks at Soil Food Web, they're nuts. If they pick the right environment, that they know more nitrogen is going to be needed in terms of applied and money spent, those are also easily found if we know what those environments are. And that is, again, it goes back to efficiency of soils and functionality of soils. But we do have to challenge status quo. We have to manage for economic results. A biological program works best with proper nutrition. Now, this proper nutrition is based on soil balance. This isn't just well, my phosphorus levels need to be at 50 and my potassium levels need to be at 300, or whatever recommendation you might be using. We look at the soil calcium to magnesium ratio first and foremost, because that tells us ideally how much oxygen is going to be in that soil for beneficial soil microbes to live, let alone thrive and do their job. It tells us what's the rooting ability of the plants that we're growing. Are the soils likely to be flocculated, or are they likely to not be flocculated and essentially be structured and look like pancakes stacked on top of one another? The potassium to magnesium ratio is another very critical one that we look at. There are others, but in terms of lack of time here today, those are probably only the two that we will look at, but those are two of the absolute most important parts of a soil test. And when we look at soil test also, if all of this applied fertilizer is actually making it to the plant as it's deemed and as it's expected, how come we cannot consistently overlay a yield map on top of soil test results and honestly be able to determine our optimum phosphorus levels are X, our optimum potassium levels are X, our optimum whatever it is we're looking at? We can't find that. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Number one, the vast majority of soil tests today, the extraction methods do not match how it is done actually in nature. Number two, soil conditions, soil test results will change daily, weekly, monthly, depending on soil moisture, soil temperature, biological activity, balance, et cetera, et cetera. There is so much more to growing a successful crop, successful, nutrient-dense, healthy, high-yielding crop than just going and blowing our budget on N, P, and K fertilizer. Plain and simple. Again, I'm not saying that nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium are not important, because they are very, very important. But so is calcium, so is magnesium, so is boron, so is zinc, so is copper. So are these 70 plus others in the right balance and the right ratios. And it is easier said than done, but once you get the soil food web working for you, you get nutrient cycling going, you get rhizophagy occurring. This is when you're going to see major, major positive changes in your soils, plants, profitability, yields, et cetera. Product positioning, management system and style. Regenerative farming, biological farming, conventional farming, they do not mix. You cannot take pieces of regenerative and pieces of conventional and try to mesh these things together. This is one of the biggest issues and one of the biggest clashes that we find is, well, you know, this part sounds pretty good. Well, this part sounds pretty good. Well, I don't like that, so I'm not going to do it. And so management style is very, very critical. And this, again, is where being very, very resilient, very steadfast in, this is what I want to do. I want to see this through. I'm going to find the people to help bring me the solutions to the problems that I'm facing. Because, again, folks, I'm sorry, conventional and regenerative, they simply don't mix. You can't take 2 or 3 steps forward with solid regenerative practices and then take 8 steps backwards, because we're still making too many poor decisions that don't support the synergies that we really need in terms of getting soils to a functional state, or again, even a moderately functional state, because you will see major, major positive changes just by some small incremental changes in the soil functionality. Synergies and antagonisms is another thing that we discuss a lot. We try to implement as many synergies as we possibly can, and we try to kick out every single antagonism that we possibly can, because, again, we don't want to take 2, 3, 4 steps forward, but then take 10 steps backwards, because we're still implementing too many antagonisms. Crop development stage, also very, very critical. This can change based on crop. You have determinate versus non-determinate. Maybe something we won't get into extremely in depth here today, again, because of lack of time. But understanding the crop or plants that we're growing is extremely critical to your success and what we're trying to do. So as a part of these management styles, in too many situations and cases today, we are very, very reactive. We focus on the past. We continue to do things as we have done them in the past because, well, it's so-called worked. Well, what does work? Well, it's worked. I'm still in business. Well, what's that mean? Does that mean that I have made the best possible decisions that I can, or I possibly can, over the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years of my farming career, to where I have maximized my profit in those years? Or does that simply mean I've done well enough on the good years to skate by the bad years? And unfortunately, that's generally what that is. Again, this is absolutely not disrespectful to anybody in this business. But we as business owners, we as farmers, we as managers, we simply have to be better. We can't rely solely on Mother Nature and commodity prices for our success, and unfortunately, that's what the vast majority of farmers have gotten wrapped up into. And if yields are good, commodity prices are good, we're going to make some money. Unfortunately, high yields and high commodity prices don't fall together very often, and this is another one of those things of challenging that status quo and doing the things that Adam and I started doing 10 or 12 years ago, that they were huge eye openers. I know just in the case of York's, at the time would have been roughly 10,000 acres. Today, it's just a little over 11,000 acres. The amount of money saved on not putting boatloads and boatloads and boatloads of high salt fertilizers, of going back to producing and growing non-GMO crops, which from a reduction oxidation perspective is also a huge key. Again, don't know that we'll get into that one in depth today, maybe another time. But our management styles are very, very critical. In reactive systems, when we see that disease, we see that insect, we immediately react of, okay, we got to get a pesticide, we got to get out there and kill it, take care of it, so they don't do more damage to our crops. On the proactive side, we focus on the present. We focus more on preventative type treatments, biological controls, and we utilize different things where alerts occur before the failure. Yet in a predictive, and this is where you get on into more of your functionality of soils and stress mitigation. It focuses on the future. It prevents causes. It addresses problems, but also brings solutions. It also involves biological controls, but alerts trends to the future. And this is where when you get into a predictive management style, you're thinking about things 1, 2, 5, 10 years down the road. I could assure you, if you sent a poll to, say, 1,000 farmers across the Corn Belt today, where do you want your farm to be in 5 years? A lot of the answers would be, I just hope to get to next year. And certainly, farming is not easy. But if we're going to remain in that reactive management style, we're going to continue to deal with the same problems. And those problems are just simply not going to go away on their own. And so management style, very, very critical. We have to think more critically with more common sense if we want to be able to address these root causes and provide solutions that can help people out monumentally. Synergies and antagonisms. This is a very, very short list. Now, there are certain things, especially on the synergistic side, that if they are used in the wrong manner, can also be an antagonism. Gypsum and lime definitely can become antagonisms. But as we're looking at soil calcium and magnesium ratios, as we're trying to rebuild soil aggregation to give all of these beneficial soil microbes the home that they need, oftentimes, at least in the Corn Belt, soils with a very, very narrow calcium and magnesium ratio is one of the biggest problems that we face. That leads to very tight soils, soils that don't drain properly or infiltrate water properly, soils that don't allow for proper root development. And so those are some of the more common things that we do utilize, but Too much of even a good thing can be an antagonism. And so this is definitely a case that, okay, if 100 pounds is good, that doesn't mean that 10,000 pounds is great, or if 500 pounds is good, that 2,000 is better. We always want to utilize very, very methodic thinking, planning, etc. Kelp, humates, mycorrhiza, fungi, different beneficial bacteria, protozoa, nematodes, systemic acquired resistance. There's a lot of things in terms of synergies that can help improve the curve of success in making this transition. But again, we want to, if we're taking that 4 or 5 steps forward, we want to keep moving forward. We don't want to be utilizing antagonisms that's causing us to go backwards. One of the biggest antagonisms that the overall industry across the world is failing to realize is the use of glyphosate or Roundup. I don't care what Monsanto said years ago or what Bayer says today or the FDA says today about it's safe. About 5 years ago, Dr. Arden Anderson from the Kansas City, Missouri area was a guest speaker at our annual winter customer meeting. And he had talked about people who had never, ever used glyphosate in their life, of having a urine test done, analyzed, and in some cases, the amount of glyphosate in their urine was at very toxic levels. So after he spoke or was a guest presenter at our meeting that year, several of us did the same thing, which there were still growers utilizing glyphosate or Roundup that previous year, but there were also several growers who had not used a single drop of glyphosate for 6 years prior to doing this. Every person, and I don't remember the number today, but it was somewhere around 15 to 20, that took a urine sample and sent it off and had it tested. Every person came back at least at the 50th percentile of toxicity and higher. And so if this is one of the safest pesticides on the face of the earth, why is it showing up in our urine? Why are certain things occurring, again, that just simply don't make sense? Probably not time for going in depth to it, but real quickly, glyphosate has 2 patents, 2 registered patents. 1 as an antibiotic and 2 as a chelator. Most people don't truly understand how glyphosate works and how it kills plants. That is a very, very critical aspect. But when we start dealing with weed resistance to things like glyphosate, knowing the patents, knowing the mode of actions, weed resistance isn't just something that occurs because we've used something too much. It is Mother Nature's survival of fittest. And as it was discussed here earlier in the presentation, plants can and plants will produce compounds to protect themselves. This is a part of this issue with this weed resistance and glyphosate, is these plants, these weeds, are producing compounds that are killing those pathogens that were inherently there to finish the job and kill those plants. So again, not going to go extremely in depth to that, but glyphosate is one of the absolute worst things ever created, especially and implemented into farming and food production systems. This was a picture taken from one of, believe, and Adam, you might be able to clarify, but believe this was one of your fields as compared to a neighbor's, and I think this was 2 years ago. But the difference is extremely obvious here. When you get synergies working for you, when you have biology doing their job, and it is biology that does the main conversion of nutrients, minerals, et cetera, and converting those into plant available forms. It doesn't make any difference how much money we spend and how much fertilizer we pour onto a field or onto a soil. What matters is, can plant get what they need when they need it in the amounts that they need. And will we always be in perfect 100% balance? That is very, very difficult. But if we can achieve Brix levels of 60% of maximum. And if you're not familiar with Brix levels, different crops have different ratings, different levels as far as 100% photosynthesis, 50%, et cetera. But if we can achieve constant levels of 60+%, we will have plants that are immune to diseases and insects. We will produce foods that are very, very nutrient dense. It is very, very amazing when we simply open our eyes to there are better ways to do things. I don't know, as far as the viewers in here today, about how many of you actually grow corn. It is one of the, no doubt, predominant crops here across the Corn Belt. Adam's farm, my farm, corn, soybeans, wheat, as well as cover crops. But we generally look at plant growth in the agriculture industry across the world as, go put some nitrogen out, put some phosphorus, put some potassium, in some cases, maybe some sulfur, maybe a little bit of zinc. That's not what plant growth is. There are 9 minerals very critical for structural growth of all plants. But again, you have others that are needed for plant immunity. You have others that are nothing more than cofactors or enzyme creators. But that number is in the 80s. And again, some of those are needed in such small, minute amounts, they're not recognized as essential. But when we look at plant growth, in the case of corn, could be soybeans, could be wheat, virtually every crop. We have vegetative and reproductive stages. And so generally, we look at plant growth as we're in the vegetative growth stages. We're building roots, we're building leaves, we're building the structure until what point in time? Well, until we see those first flowers. Then we look at, and generally we say, okay, well, now we're in reproductive growth stages. Unfortunately, that's not 100% true. There are things going on and occurring. I can't honestly say that it's every single plant growing across the world, but I would venture to say with a very high level of confidence that it is a huge, huge percentage. That we have vegetative and reproductive growth occurring virtually at the same time, especially in some of those earlier stages of plant growth. And if you look at some of the challenges that we have, especially corn, soybeans, wheat, other grains, of how do we produce another 10 to 20% on an annual basis? In some cases, if you really wanted to manage extremely in depth and very intensely, what would it take to double my yield? Because that is possible in most cases. To do that, we have to have balance. And that's why this slide and a couple others are here, because in corn, we don't just go from vegetative growth from the time that first seedling first emerges from the soil until the time that we hit the tassel period, where generally the industry looks as, okay, that's when reproductive growth is starting. We have reproductive growth occurring at V3, when those plants are generally about 4 inches tall. We have reproductive growth again occurring at about V5 to V6. But in total, in a corn plant, there are 13 cycles where it goes from vegetative to reproductive and back and forth. And so when we look at plant growth, number one, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen make up 95 to 96% of total plant biomass at maturity. Again, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen make up 95 to 96% of total plant biomass at maturity. Well, where does that leave nitrogen? Where does that leave phosphorus? Where does that leave potassium? They're very, very small amounts. They can work in conventional dysfunctional systems because they do provide a little bit of energy. But again, they're also contributing to a lot of the problems that we're dealing with. Again, this slide is to simply help educate and help people realize that if we're only focusing on NP and K, if we're not focusing on balance, if we're not focusing on, so you have four primary nutrients that drive vegetative growth: nitrate, nitrogen, potassium, calcium, and chloride. Your reproductive drivers, your reproductive nutrients are pretty much everything else: phosphorus, sulfur, boron, magnesium, manganese, iron, on down the list. And so as we're trying to overcome some of these barriers and some of these challenges, nutrient balance, especially at critical growth stages, is very, very important. And this is also where some of our problems are created, because we are putting way too much fertilizer out, but we're also doing it at the wrong time. In corn plants, these are the main critical stages of growth. This is where we do the primary sap analysis. If you're not familiar with sap analysis, it is a much more sophisticated form of a plant tissue analysis. But in corn, these are the critical stages of growth. Every crop has different critical stages of growth. And so, you know, whether it's, again, corn, soybeans, wheat, maybe it's vegetables, maybe it's fruit, maybe it's something different. But understanding and being able to work with somebody that can help you understand those is also important for your success. When we see insects, we have to realize that insects are nature's garbage collectors and diseases are the cleanup crew. If you have insects in your fields and yet the weeds along the road or road ditches are void of insects, that tells you that your crop you're growing is sicker than the weeds in the road or road ditch, and vice versa. If the crop you're growing does not have insects and yet the road ditch or the weeds, etc., do, that tells you you're doing a much better job. And so here again, a little critical thinking, a little bit of common sense can be a tremendous eye-opener. But in terms of eliminating all the non-beneficial insects, all the non-beneficial pathogens, they have roles in the world today, and they have roles in nature. We will never, ever get rid of them. And honestly, we don't want to. Try to wrap this up here fairly quickly, but a few more keys to success. We have to utilize a true systems approach. This involves not just focusing on NP and K farming systems. This involves doing a soil health assessment, looking at all previous records of what fertilizers, how much were applied, pesticides, etc. What are some of the problems of a given field, or maybe it's an area of a field that needs to be addressed first and foremost. Understanding that applied fertilizer does not mean plant available. It never has and it never will. We need to use much more predictive and preventative management rather than reactive. And we have to understand that every single decision that we make, it either supports or destroys the ability to build soils, efficiencies, and functionality. We need absolutely to reduce and avoid pesticides where we possibly can. This again goes back to the predictive preventative management. If we have nutrient balance within our plants and we can maintain that through the growing season, the likelihood of you having a disease or an insect problem is very, very, very small. Application and timing, especially in different crops, very critical to your success. And simply, the difference between average performance and exceptional performance is management intensity. We hear way too often, and I do understand and realize that farmers are very, very busy people. But we hear way too often, well, you know, I haven't been in the back 40 or I haven't been in, you know, Dad's 80 or I haven't seen that field a month. We have to be better than that. This is our livelihood. This is our business. We have to be willing to push ourselves in the right direction to see the success that we want to see. So I'm going to finish here with just a few pictures. This is an old Quonset building at York's Farm. This is where we started. We had 8 500-gallon of these extractors. They were originally tea brewers. They were transitioned into extractor. But because of the success that we have seen, because of bringing solutions to people's farms, you're going to see some major changes here. This is our new facility. That was Adam. This was done 4 years ago. Is that correct?
Yeah, we built it middle of COVID, if I remember right, 2020.
Okay. So it doesn't give you a 10,000 foot view of the facility, but what started is 8 500-gallon units. We now have 8 2,500 gallon tanks within the facility, 4 each, or for water, and then our liquid compost extract. There'll be a few other pictures here, but again, because of the success, because of bringing solutions and helping people overcome problems, we've been able to build a very, very nice facility. This is one of the liquid extractors. This was one of the things that Todd had turned us on to after his first visit back in 2014 or 2015. It took a little pinching of the ear, a little bit of bending some fingers. Todd didn't want to give this up, but by God, we finally got it. And it has been absolutely monumental to the success, but also the ability to produce thousands of gallons in a very, very short period of time. Here's a picture of Adam and Rob, another one of folks we work with out of Texas, in one of the compost piles. Here is a picture of the worm beds in our worm room, which is kept at constant temperature, humidity throughout the entire year. Here is some of our stainless steel tanks for different things, whether that be biological products, micronutrient type products, other soil amendments, the ability to be able to mix things on demand for certain circumstances, certain root causes that need different solutions. We have implemented a couple of different seed treatment systems, one at the main facility there at York's, one here at my place, where we are using many of our own biological products, which has also been very, very successful in helping produce higher yields, more nutrient-dense plants, etc. This is the end of the slideshow. I think I might have went over by about 10 minutes. My apologies. But we will open it up or turn it back over to Brian here, and I think we'll do Q&A maybe.
Yep, we're going to have a quick video, talk about our promotion, and then we'll move right into the Q&A section. And as Brad puts here in the slide, just a reminder to everybody, if you have a question you want to have answered by the panelists, make sure that you go ahead and post it in the Q&A section. Okay, thank you so much, Brad, for that wonderful presentation. And now we're going to move into a quick video, and then we're going to talk about Q&A. All right, so just a little bit, we have our Kickstart Your Soil package, and our video is going to get into a lot of the details behind this, but there's good significant savings with this particular promotion that we're running, the Kickstart Your Soil package. So let's go ahead and watch the video. Oops, sorry, back. Oh, wow. 1 second, folks. Sorry for the quick drive-by here. There we go.
The benefit of being in the Soil Food Web School is you learn a lot of tips and tricks. It taught me what good compost was and what good biology was.
What I've learned, one of the big key things for me is that plants don't need to be fed. With the microbes, they are able to feed themselves and supply themselves everything that they need from the soil.
This, is something that I had never seen before until I took this school. And understanding where you are in this process in your field really helps you make some management decisions.
When we first started this journey, our soils were very degraded. I couldn't find an earthworm to save our lives. We were spending way too much money on fertilizer, and just the consistency from year to year was just not there for us.
I would plant my plants in my soil that I had amended with compost that I purchased, and I'd see really good production in the beginning, and then it would just sort of taper off. I knew you could get bad compost, What I didn't know was how good compost can be when you make it yourself and properly. We've looked at my compost under the microscope, and we've looked at my soil that has had all of the previous compost applied to it the year before. I had no life. And then Brian and I looked at my soil after I applied the extracts and the compost that I put in the plants and started everything with, to having all of this life.
AgroPura was a farm that reached out to us, really struggling to work within a conventional system. The yields were quite low, so we were able to see over 100% yield increases in these areas. And the second year we saw again about 100% yield increase on top of that.
We never got the productivity that we're getting today. In a month, we are going to get about 20 tons per hectare on grapes in the first year.
What happened between 21 and 22 is our organic matter improved a little bit. Our pH dropped a little bit, so we're headed the right direction. Our EC improved, and all of this led to an increase in growth in our plants. The other thing that changed was our fungal to bacterial ratio. And I think that's what I'm most excited about.
Big picture benefits is lower input costs, which is a big deal. Yields have improved. And we are more so self-sufficient as a farm. We were probably saving right out the gate probably anywhere between $100 to $150 per acre. Some of that cost is obviously less tillage, lowering your fuel costs. We've cut out all seed treatment. Majority of our fungicide costs. We cut out between 60 and 100 units of nitrogen. We have no potash or DAP costs, and then we do not use any insecticide. We've cut all those out.
The results that I had from implementing Brian's practices was just phenomenal.
Bringing Miles and Terraforma and the Soil Food Web on board has been probably one of my happiest and best decisions.
For me, it's about trying to leave this soil better than when I found it, so my children don't have to go through some of the challenges that I've had to.
If you're interested in joining the soil revolution, this is a great time. We are making the Kickstart Your Soil package available for $39.20. With the Kickstart Your Soil package, you can register for the Soil Food Web School's foundation courses with Dr. Elaine Ingham for just $39.20, saving over $1,000 through November 1st. You'll also get Stage 1 of the Consultant or Grower Training Program totally free, saving a further $15.40. That's 26 hours of mentor time dedicated to helping you make your own biologically complete compost and develop your microscopy skills to qualify as a certified Soil Food Web Lab technician. The total value of this package is over $6,500, for which you'll only pay $39.20, saving over $2,600. That's 40% off. At the Soil Food Web School, we are so confident in the quality of our courses, we proudly offer a 100% risk-free guarantee. Here's how it works. From the date of your registration, you'll enjoy a 30-day window with a no questions asked money-back guarantee on the total price you paid for our courses. The only condition is that you cannot have watched more than 32 lectures of the foundation courses. Your satisfaction is our priority, and we stand behind our commitment to your success. Finance options are now available, so you can pay at your own pace with a firm. Register today.
All right. Get my screen back here. So as the video showed, we definitely have the Kickstart promotion, and hopefully some of you will be able to take advantage of that, and we'll see you at the school. All right, let's get into the Q&A section. So panelists, if you can, just go ahead and unmute yourself, be ready to be able to answer. And the first question is from JSS, and the question is, regeneration in soil touches other aspects of other parts of our life. My question is, how do you sell regenerative produce, as many people are not aware of regenerative produce, and they think of organic is the best? And how to tell them regenerative is better than organic without showing off? So panelists, what do you think about the marketplace as far as, we have the organic standard. Does there need to be another categorization of regenerative or nutrient dense, food products? What do you guys think?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's there's a fallacy that organic means high nutrient density. Unfortunately, that's not the case. This is where taking and doing some different testing of whatever fruit, produce, et cetera, that you're growing, and have nutrient testing done in a regenerative environment, even versus an organic environment. You know, if you look at, an apple today versus an apple 50 years ago, to get the same nutrition from so-called the same apple, the amount of apples you would have to eat today is somewhere around 20 or 25. I don't know what the exact number is, but it's a huge amount. And so if we have the information that's backed by solid science and actual facts to be able to show the difference in that nutrient density, that is what's going to help open people's minds and show them, because unfortunately there's still, and I mean, don't get me wrong, I have no issues with organic production. But just because it's organic doesn't mean it is nutrient dense. And that's one of the things, if we want to play our role as food producers of bringing better nutrition, because better nutrition gives us better immunity. It gives us things that most people today do not believe to be true. And that is the body's innate ability to heal itself. And so if we have that data, if we have the nutrient density data showing the difference of a true regenerative versus organic, that's what's going to help turn heads.
Yeah, and I think there's a part of the problem in the marketplace right now. I think a lot of people, the lay consumer, may conflate and think that organic equals regenerative, that they're the same thing, that they're the same standard, really, which really is not the case. And I think we also have a problem in regenerative agriculture. I think it's the term regenerative agriculture is not very well defined, or it means different things to different people in many cases.
Also, Brian, I think when you can relate to, or what they can relate to, is something that they do every day, like the human body and the microflora in your stomach. And, when you're defining what organic and regenerative, sometimes they don't have a clue what that means. But if you can relate it to something that they deal with every day in their home with VOCs and things like that, and kind of compare and contrast to that, then they kind of get it a little bit better. So that, I think because that original question was something about marketing, wasn't it?
Yeah, how do you sell?
Sell it, right.
Yeah, and really marketing is all part of that, right? Which is, how do you inform the consumer that your product is different from other products?
Right.
And I think we don't need to pick on just organic. Really what the general public needs is information about, let's start with all the toxic chemicals and pesticides and what's the nutritional concentration there, and show that organic is higher than that, and if you're doing a good job with your compost. But then when we show them regenerative, it's even higher. So then which one do you want to buy? Right. I know most people are going to go after the highest nutrients, the most amount of turning on of your ability to keep pathogens out, all of, have infiltration in the soil. And it's like here, we early on, Brad was talking about, the soil. Well, if your root system can only go down an inch or two, and now there's, totally blocked off, it's totally compacted. Yeah, you think that the roots aren't gonna go very far. So now we get the regenerative system going, and those root systems can go down as deep as they need to in order to get to that water that should be stored. But if you haven't had any good biology in that, it's not soil, is it? It's dirt. If you don't have any way to build those aggregates and hold the water in the soil, we're not going to be getting the benefit back. So there's so many things that you went over, Brad, that I'd love to go through each one of them and kind of chat and talk about what you've been doing and then what we've been doing. And and it's just a stronger situation for all of us to be able to market, to sell the regenerative product.
Yeah, and one other thing I think about organic, why did organic come around? Why did it become popular with consumers? And people think they look at a toxicity, as a potential problem in the food system that organic's trying to address. But I think organic completely misses the whole nutrient density aspect of it. So it's like missing a major component that, in the regenerative practices, yeah, we are able to reduce the toxicities or eliminate them from the equation. But we're also, just the nature of the way we're trying to farm is trying to bring back nutrient density into the equation. And for me as a consumer of food, I'm very concerned about what is the nutrient density of the food I'm eating, but there's really no good ways right now to tell that of the fresh produce, that type of thing. And that's something that I think is going to have to get resolved somehow, some way, so that consumers have the ability to understand what is the nutrient load or capacity of the foods that I'm actually eating.
Well, someone that eats organic or regenerative food, the bottom line is it's as simple as you can taste the difference.
For sure.
I mean, right? I mean, when the bricks are higher and the sugars are higher and it's grown in nutrient dense soil, man, oh man, can you taste the difference? It's the problem is our taste buds have been numbed down,
right?
From all the sugars and the artificial sweeteners.
For sure.
Well, what about people though, Todd, though, also who have never experienced any to eat any highly nutrient dense food? And that's also
Right.
part of the problem is because there is no standard, because for years we've consumed crap because that's what we've produced. And so it's a mountain to climb, but as Adam said earlier, I want to leave it better than when I found it. And we have several of our customers that have the same mentality, but that's mentality as farmers that we all have to have. And there's some people, unfortunately, that believe that, there's nothing more so-called green than growing corn and soybeans. And well, I'm sorry, if we're continuing to degrade soils and create more dysfunctionality of those soils, just because you're growing a green plant does not make it the best. And we need standards, and we need more education. We need more understanding. We need more people challenging status quo.
Great. Okay, anything else, panelists, we want to add before we move on to the next question? All right. Next question. This is kind of a technical question here, which is a big problem on my mixed vegetable farm this season was powdery mildew. Can the economical approach, even under organic farming, is to apply fungicides to control this disease? What is the biological solution to this kind of disease?
It's to get the beneficial microorganisms back out on your leaf surfaces. Make certain that you've got the organisms in the soil that are doing nutrient cycling. So your plant is being fed by the biology in the soil. And if the plant is healthy, that means it's got all of the nutrients it needs to turn on their immune system when something like powdery mildew shows up. And it's a surface phenomenon. You have to have the right microorganisms present on those leaf surfaces, on the stems, on the flowers, wherever the mildew's going. And you will cover those with an adequate amount. 70% of the surface area of the plant leaf, the roots, whatever you're looking at least 70% of that has to be covered with these beneficial organisms. Otherwise, there's space for the mildew to grow, and now it's competition. Get out there with a compost tea and apply, and just bring a leaf or two back with you to your microscope and make sure that it's fully covered, 70% at least.
Yeah, Brian, Brian, we talk a lot about compost teas, actives and inactives, right? Extract. Mm-hmm. In this situation, definitely you want to do an activated aerated compost tea. When you
want that to stick, you want those organisms bacteria to grab onto those surfaces.
Yeah, I mean, this is powdery mildew is a common disease a lot of my clients deal with. And it is completely controllable through the use of using, like Todd was saying, activated aerated compost teas. And it comes down to timing. So you got to make sure that you apply these products, the compost teas, at the right time frames. And also the approach to when you're spraying. You know, I know I see some people when they go out and they're spraying their crops or the products, they're spraying top down and they get the tops of the leaves covered. But you really need to make sure you're being able to spray and get under the leaves as well. It's not just covering the tops of the leaves. You also want to cover the underside of the leaves, because that is a significant vector for powdery mildew, at least, is coming from underneath as well. So there's, by all means, you can completely control powdery mildew. You just make sure that you have the right processes and approaches to do it.
Brad and Adam, I think I've seen it out in your fields before. You guys have dealt with it here and there, right?
Not so much powdery mildew, but I mean, numerous other fungal diseases that biology, no doubt, can help prevent, but also the use of a refractometer, monitoring your Brix levels. And so there are certain things based on, in the refractometer, is the line clear or is it cloudy? Because if it's completely clear, that tells us we have a calcium deficiency. If it's cloudy, if it's tough to tell, okay, so are we 14 or are we 14 and a half? That's your indicator that your calcium levels are sufficient. If you're less than 8, you're boron deficient. You can implement SAP analysis that gives us an idea on, which it's not for every crop, but for the vast majority of crops, at least through Nova Lab out of the Netherlands. But there's a lot of things that can be implemented and completely change things like powdery mildew and things that we generally, as a farming community, well, it's normal. Well, we had it last year, so we're going to have it again next year. We don't have to continue to fight these things. And certainly when we do, we don't always have to utilize or resort to the pesticides, because Mother Nature is really, really amazing in the fact that we can fix a lot of things with things that we have at our disposal to us right now.
Yep, I don't see any point or purpose in putting out something that's so toxic that it's gonna not only kill the disease-causing organism, maybe, but it's going to kill the very things you want to have out there to cover all of your plant surfaces and prevent the diseases from being able to germinate and to grow, because the spores of all of these mildews are what's blown around in the wind. It's on the feet of all the birds. It's on all the other little things in soil or up on the surface of the plant, spreading the mix of microorganisms. So we want everything that those critters might walk around on to be completely covered with a set of beneficial organisms on their surfaces, so that that's what's being spread all through the, from the soil surface up to the top of the, the highest flower that's on the plant this year.
There was a follow-up in the Q&A that came around, which is, when is the right times of year to apply compost teas? And I think that's part of the approach.
When you have leaves.
Yeah, exactly. Get them on early,
Right.
when the plants are starting to grow and push out leaves.
And typically you should only have to do it once, unless somebody upwind of you applies something that sprays into your areas. And then you're going to see that there was something going on when you're walking the fields. So please get out in your fields and take a look at what your worst pathogens look like, so that you catch them. If they're there, you catch them immediately. You go back and you make your 24-hour tea brew, and you're out, 24 hours later, spraying only, but you only need to spray in those places where you've got the disease plus a safe buffer. So you don't have to go out and apply it to all of your plants, but you definitely want to keep anything, get the surfaces of anything close to the place where you could see the disease. Isn't it nice of Mother Nature to give us warning that it's, you better get out here and you better fix this problem now, or you will be very sorry.
Right. And you know, also look at your management practices that you have as well. Let's say you go out and you spray compost teas early in the season, you get the biology covered on the surface of the leaves. But then you do additional spraying of other things. Be cognizant that those other sprays could impact the biology. And if they do, you have to question, why are you using that? And if you continue to think that you need to use that, then make sure you go back and apply compost tea to re-inoculate those leaves, the surface of those leaves. So always pay attention throughout your growing cycle. What are the things you're doing to your crops, and what are the potential risks to the microbiology, both in the soil as well as on the surface of the plants? Okay, panelists, anything else you guys want to add to this? All right, let's look at another question here. This question is, my org is working on an urban agroforestry experiment. My plans are to utilize a pathways to produce vegetables and fruits. What are some challenges we could encounter while transitioning compacted urban soils into productive agroforestry spaces capable of taking advantage of the microclimate produced by fruit trees we are planning to plant? All right, panelists, any opinions here?
Some of the challenges they would encounter while transitioning compacted urban soils into productive. Well, the compacted urban soils are probably not really soil, they're dirt. And so that's going to be, that's the background that you're dealing with as you're trying to get the biology to do its thing, how rapidly. And so you've got to get a significant amount of oxygen back into those compacted soils. You have to have the bacteria and the fungi taking those sand silt clay particles and producing a aggregate. The bacteria have the glues that glue the sand silt clays, rocks, pebbles, organic matter to those micro aggregates. It is the fungi with their strands that take those micro aggregates and pull them together, kind of like packages that are going to be delivered. Where's the string? Where's the way you hold that aggregate together? And so you make that habitat adequate for all these organisms that require aerobic conditions in order to build that structure in the soil, so that there are airways and passageways. There's large, broad, wide passageways. If you've got earthworms, for example, certain kinds of microarthropods, very useful at building that structure. And we've got to have the bacteria and the fungi, and how many different species, as many as you can get in there. So get the compost that has all the diversity you could probably imagine. And then each year you're going to go out and find more composts, add those to the soil surface, make compost extracts out of them, compost teas, so that you keep maximizing that diversity, so no disease, no problem organism can outcompete these beneficial organisms that we have in our soil.
I look at urban, types of agroforestry versus, just traditional agriculture. There's a lot of similarities. Compaction is definitely something we have to deal with. I would just say that there's probably some management practice changes that would be different from a traditional agricultural to an urban type of environment, where you're not going to have necessarily the same types of equipment. But I guess one thing that comes out to mind for me is you're probably dealing with treated water in an urban situation. So make sure that you're dealing with either the chlorine or chloramine type of treatment before you put that water onto that urban soils.
And that's typically done by putting in a humic acid, maybe a fulvic acid, to help grab on to the chlorine and the chloramine, and then the biology will have the chance to decompose those materials. The chlorine goes over here, not there. Do not put it with my water, because then it makes the water a toxic material. So you want to have the humic and fulvic acids produced, and it will take care of those problem materials. Now, what if you've got something like glyphosate in the water? What if you're downstream of people who are using a billion different kinds of toxic chemicals? You're going to have to run your water through something that is just basically really good compost tea, so that the toxic chemicals are being decomposed by the microorganisms in that compost. And so what comes out the other end of your container is something that doesn't have those toxic chemicals in it anymore. Now, there are things that can't be dealt with that quickly, so you're going to have to pay attention to what is in your water.
All right, panelists, anything else on this one? All right, next question definitely is teed up right for Adam and for Brad. This is from John, and the question is, you mentioned that you monitor calcium, magnesium, and potassium magnesium ratios. Do you have different target ratios depending on the crop and its nutrient requirements? If so, how do you think about making adjustments for different crops?
Calcium magnesium ratios and K to mag ratios really don't change crop to crop. Certainly, certain crops will use different minerals in different amounts, but when we are looking at a soil test, again, these are two of the first things that we do look at. But the thing that changes with calcium to magnesium ratios is more soil type and CEC. Sometimes you'll hear people say, well, calcium magnesium ratio based on soil base saturations is 7-to-1. And that 7-to-1 ratio will cover most soils. But if you're in a sand, you actually want more magnesium there, because magnesium is going to help hold more water. Now, there's also a huge difference between very, very poor light sand, say 0.5% organic matter, as compared to a sandy loam. Now, by the same token, a very heavy gumbo type soil, you might want very, very likely that to be an 8-to-1, 9-to-1, possibly, very, very rare case, but possibly maybe 10-to-1, because calcium is the one that helps flocculate soils. You also need beneficial fungi to hold that calcium in the upper portions of the soil, or you're going to continue to have trouble. But no, to answer your question, different crops, different calcium and magnesium and potassium and magnesium ratios, that doesn't change. Now, the maybe some intricacies of what we would do with different crops, that could be done, but not on the two particular ratios that you asked here, John.
I tend to think that we just have to get the organic matter back into the soil. And then the microorganisms responding to what the plant is putting out to tell those bacteria and fungi, all those different species, to go out and get the nutrients that the plant needs from the sand, silt, and clay. The silica bilayer is a great repository of all kinds of nutrients in it, and so it's a place that the organisms can keep coming to time and time again, especially after a rainfall. Things get replenished in those silica bilayers. So as long as my bacteria and fungi, protozoa and nematodes are have the proper ratios for the plant you want to grow, I don't really worry too much about the calcium, magnesium, potassium, magnesium ratios. We're going to have enough. If the biology can grow, and you can very easily see the growth of the bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes, you have your microscope, and it's, when you get good at it, you spend 10 minutes per sample looking at what's there and going, oops, we could be in trouble because I don't see bacteria, I don't see the fungi. And so these nutrients could be possible problems under those conditions. So what do? You put some really good compost back into the soil, or you put it in as a compost extract or as a compost tea, really kind of up to you which way you want to go. And then you do have to give a few hours for the interactions to start happening in the soil. So now you've got a whole different situation in that soil, and it's actually soil.
Yeah, I definitely see correlations when we are seeing that the biological biomass is improving in the soil. We're getting more beneficial organisms and more organic matter, that we definitely see the calcium magnesium ratios improve. And it's great to see, that I have some of my clients that we don't use any kind of chemical fertilizers or any of the products besides compost extracts, and teas, and we can monitor and watch that actual ratios changing over time as we're improving the organic matter and the biology in the soil. Okay, panelists, anything else you guys want to add to this question before we close? All right, so let me go ahead and conclude here. So this was the last webinar of our Regenerative Transition Food Systems in the Soil Food Web. This was Dirt to Soil, webinar 3, and we will have a replay for this one. And just a reminder for our other 2 webinars that we had earlier in this month, they're definitely available for replay at webinar.soilfoodweb.com and our YouTube channel at Soil Food Web School. So definitely go ahead and check those out. And I'd like to give some thanks here. So thank you for the support staff we have behind the scenes that do an amazing job of promoting and informing everybody and doing all the technical behind the scenes things to make these webinars work. So we have a huge support staff that does this for us. I'd just like to give a big round of applause to them. What a fantastic webinar series that we had this October and November. And then I also like to thank the attendees. Without you, we wouldn't be running these webinars. So your interest and your desire to get informed is what drives us to do this work. So again, thank you for attending our webinars. And then obviously to our panelists today for sharing their work. So Brad and Adam and Todd, fantastic job that you guys are doing, very informative. And Elaine, without you, I wouldn't be where I'm at today, and your graciousness of sharing your knowledge has been fantastic. So thank you.
Well, I'm glad everybody showed up, and I think it's been really interesting. I'd love to have a few more chats with all 3 of the
Right.
folks here. Just
Brad, Adam, and Todd. Yeah, exactly.
Yep. So maybe we can do that sometime. Have a virtual. What are the experiments? What are the things that we need to do to move our understanding along? And it does mean that we have to start looking at biomes and holding those boundaries to determine where they are and how different they are for different plant species. Exactly. Oh, joy. We have enough things to do to keep all of us well paid, we hope, for several hundred years.
I agree. Okay,
well,
with that.
Brian and Elaine for having us.
Oh, for sure. By all means.
Yeah, thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you very much.
Want to hear more over the time. I'm sure you will.
Keep doing what you do. Keep doing what you do.
Yeah, exactly.
Keep getting better.
Yep.
You got it. Okay, with that, I think we're going to go ahead and close. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Don't forget to click that like button, subscribe to our channel, and ring the notification bell to stay updated with all our new videos.